Hello, everyone. Welcome to our panel on empowerment, Women of Color Unite, made possible by Women and Philanthropy at the UConn Foundation. I am Manisha Sinha, the Draper Chair in American History at the University of Connecticut. And we have a very interesting group of panelists today. I will introduce myself and they will then introduce themselves and we will get started. As I mentioned, teach at the University of Connecticut, and I'm the author of The Counter-Revolution of Slavery, which was featured in the 1619 Project of the New York Times, and The Slave Scores, A History of Abolition, which was longlisted for the National Book Award in Nonfiction. And as an Indian American woman teaching the history of slavery, abolition, feminism, the Civil War, and Reconstruction, I am really happy to welcome you all to our discussion today on women of color, the challenges we face, and the kinds of inspiration, perhaps, that we can offer to our guests today. So why don't we get started with introducing ourselves. I will begin with Sokchet, who is here in my screen first, and then I will call on all the panelists to introduce themselves after her, and then we can begin our conversation. Go ahead, Sokchet.
Hey everybody, I'm Sokchet McCutcheon. I went to UConn Law, graduated 2006. Currently live in New Jersey, and I'm Associate General Counsel at Verizon in the Privacy Office. Before that, I worked in big law, and I am mom to 2 boys who are 5 and 3.
Go ahead, Meghna.
Hi, thanks, Manisha. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Meghna Shah. I'm a graduate of the law school as well, 2004. And I am a partner at a global law firm, Evershed Sutherland, in the New York City office, which is where I also live. And in my work there, I co-lead the cannabis industry team and do some international fraud investigation and commercial litigation work. But most importantly, I've been engaged in DEI efforts. You know, they've been an important part of my life for a long time. And actually while I was at the law school, I was one of the founding members of the South Asian Bar Association of Connecticut, and have been working in DEI in various capacities ever since.
Thank you, Meghna. Shante, you're next on my screen.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Shante Mickens, and I am an undergraduate alum of the CALS class of 2010. While at UConn, I also was a student athlete. I lettered in volleyball, so being an athlete at UConn was a really big part of my life, and I'm excited to share some of my experiences with that. I currently live in the DC area, and I've been living in DC for almost 20 years. I'm a native of California, and I currently work at a firm called MLT, and that's Management Leadership for Tomorrow, and we're in the nonprofit sector. I've been a nonprofit for about 10 years, so definitely want to share some of my kind of thoughts and views on DE and I. Thanks again for inviting me to be on this panel. Super excited to be with all of these amazing women of color.
Thank you, Shante. Can we have you introduce yourself, Amy?
Hi, my name is Amy Lynn Meyerson. I'm the current president of the Connecticut Bar Association, where we have a lot of ongoing DE&I programs, including our Constance Baker Motley Speaker Series, where we're addressing topics of criminal justice, education, healthcare, housing, voter suppression, political equity, employment access to credit, business ownership, and advancement. And we're also looking at underlying issues that provide impediments to limiting racism so that our state and nation can fulfill their promises to provide justice for all. I am also a past president of the National Asian Pacific American Bar Association, or NAPABA, a past president of the NAPABA Law Foundation, a past chair of the American Bar Association's Solo Small Firm and General Practice Division. I practice business and general corporate law as a solo practitioner in Fairfield County. I majored in political science and comparative studies as an undergraduate at Duke University and received my law degree from the University of Connecticut School of Law in 1994. I was fortunate to join the UConn Law School at a time when DE&I initiatives were underway, and I, along with a handful of fellow Asian Pacific American law students law students formed UConn Law School's Asian Pacific American Law Students Association. And then 20 years ago, I founded the Connecticut Asian Pacific American Bar Association in 2000 and the Kapaba Educational Foundation in 2006. I served as a commissioner on the Asian Pacific American Affairs Commission for Connecticut from 2010 to 2012. And the American Bar Association, I am currently serving as the vice chair of the ABA's Representatives and Observers to the United Nations and on the ABA House of Delegates and on its Scope and Correlation of Work Committee. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this discussion.
Thank you, Amy. That's fantastic. So our last panelist here can introduce herself. Luz, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I'm like, how do I follow Amy? My name is Luz Burgos Lopez. She, her, hers, ella. I'm a second-year doctoral student in the NEAC School of Education. My research focus is on racially conscious practices and research in higher education and anti-Blackness within non-Black communities, specifically within the Latinx community. In addition, I am an assistant dean of students at UConn Stores and have been working in higher education for 10+ years with a focus on supporting and advocating historically racialized and marginalized communities in higher education.
Thank you so much, Liz. So we have a wonderful group of panelists representing, different groups and different areas in their professional life and their areas of expertise. So I'm very, very much looking forward to this discussion. I will get us started with asking a few questions, and then of course we can open it up to the audience, to our guests, who can, feel free to ask the panelists questions too. So let me begin with something that is sort of very basic and personal, and that is the issue of, cultural bias that you may have faced, and how your particular backgrounds growing up, how did all that affect you in your work, but also maybe some struggles or challenges that you may have encountered in your studies or in your early career. I will let you all, whoever wants to go first can unmute themselves and talk a little bit about that. Well, I see that our panelists are hesitant and maybe a little shy about talking about that. So, Sochet.
I can go if...
Oh, go ahead, Luz.
I was waiting for a call. So in terms of culture, I think a lot of, as a first generation low income Puerto Rican from Hartford, for folks not familiar with Hartford, demographically predominantly Latinx and Black community members, going to college was like a thing that had to happen if I wanted to get out of my circumstances. And so I had to learn how to advocate early on as a non-English native speaker since second grade. So that's when I first learned to advocate for myself. And so that drive has really continued and really defined my educational journey, because along the way, both educationally and in career, I'm in places where people are like, either I'm too young to be in the position I'm in, or I'm the only one. And so that kind of like constant advocacy and trying to challenge like really whiteness and anti-Blackness in education. And then also realizing that I was like indoctrinated into whiteness and anti-Blackness while being educated in institutions of higher learning, and also as someone pursuing a doctoral degree in that as well. And so that has been a challenge in being the person who's either seen as not a team player because I call my coworkers out, or I have very high demands of people because essentially I'm asking folks to do their job with a racially conscious lens. And I'm advocating for students. And sometimes, I'm sure other panelists can speak to this, you have to make decisions. Do you advocate for yourself or the people you're advocating for, right? And so oftentimes that is, I think, a tension as folks of color that we have in white fields, to decide which fight we're gonna take up and which one has a long-term effect. Because sometimes things that happen to me, I'm like, the impact of me addressing this is not worth the headache, but is the impact of supporting the overall goal of my students, when I'm thinking for me in education, that's gonna have a longer effect. So I think that tension exists, but it's centered really in me constantly anchoring, like reminding myself where I came from and who I am, and knowing that like I can be unapologetically me so that other folks who come after me can be more authentic and be more themselves. And I think specifically as a non-Black person of color, that's even more important, because it's very easy for me to be assimilated into whiteness, and folks, they tend to say like, oh, you're so nice. And, you know, being short and light skinned and Puerto Rican, people are like, oh, it's nice, but my politics are very Black. And then that's when everyone's like, who did we hire? But I think it's important for me to challenge that, because I do have colleagues who can't push in a particular way because of how they're read, especially if they're darker skinned than me. And how do I show up to counter those narratives is important, even as I'm also creating space for myself.
That's so interesting, Luz, because what you said just now is fascinating in terms of how we face sometimes these sort of challenges because of multiple and intersecting identities, right? As a Latina, as some first generation college, non-native English speaker, there's just so many different avenues through which one gets put in a box, and the ways in which one can, you know, challenge that is so important. So, you know, I like the fact that you spoke about your own personal background and how you bring that to the ways in which you would address instances of discrimination that you plainly see in front of you. Actually, I was thinking of going next to Amy, because Amy, you put up in our chat very nicely a series also, which maybe you would want to talk about, the Constance Baker Motley speaker series. I love the name of the series because a new biography of hers is coming out by Tomiko Brown Nagin. So I guess you know that, right? And so just, you know, maybe talk a bit about your own background and about the series too. That would be great.
Sure. As I mentioned earlier, we started a series here at the Connecticut Bar Association in collaboration with the Connecticut Bar Foundation and the Connecticut Bar Foundation Fellows. It started back in July, and we were pleased to have some of Judge Baker Motley's relatives who participated with us as well. But we are bringing together different individuals from across the state who have expertise in the various different topics that contribute to systemic racism. And we're hoping to bring more people together to talk about the issues and hopefully move the needle forward a little bit. I did post the link in the chat box, and all of our past series programs have been recorded and they're free to be viewed by the public. And we have some additional programming coming up over the next couple of months. In terms of microaggressions, like I experience them frequently throughout my day and throughout my career, as many of you have as well. We've had to pick and choose our battles of which ones that we want to address. Interestingly, the Connecticut Bar Association sent out a survey recently to get the experiences of other people in the legal profession. And there were several personal accounts of issues of racism and harassment that have been occurring throughout the legal profession. And so we hope to address those and make a difference there as well.
Yeah. That's a good point, you know, because we sometimes feel that, you know, there are certain professions, certainly in terms of law, you think of equality before the law, and you'd think that most lawyers would be practicing that, and that's simply not true. You know, one gets into so many situations where one's identity or even when one's expertise is called into question, which can be, you know, really troubling. Meghna, I know you're the other lawyer here with us. Would you like to join in and tell us a bit about your own experience, both in terms of your struggles growing up, but also in your career?
Sure, yeah. And I mean, I'll pick up on a little bit of what Luz said, because it's important for me to acknowledge on this panel and generally that I'm a white passing South Asian woman. And so that, you know, there's some element of the struggle that I haven't faced. The things that I think that I sort of identify with in terms of what's already been said is, as the child of immigrants and, you know, pursuing a law career, I felt like there was some social and other distance that becomes evident. And I think, you know, probably all professions have this to a greater or lesser degree, but certainly the law, you know, there's an element of it being passed down a little bit, if you will, and many folks have lawyers in their families that became lawyers in the U.S. and so there's some amount of distance that I felt there, and I think that they're on account of culture and on account of just not having had maybe that sort of intimate exposure to the law beforehand. There's obviously also, like Amy said, I think microaggressions are sort of a daily thing, and the ones that I've sort of observed for myself are things like, sort of casual shortening of my name, or calling me Megan or something without just kind of a very casual disregard of names, which I'm sure everyone, a lot of folks can relate to. Some maybe microaggressions around dietary restrictions or being mixed up with others of the same ethnicity, that sort of thing. But I think that really that distance, that felt distance, can have a real impact on your ability to perform and your experience until you start to find ways, and I know we're going to get to this later in the panel, that you're able to integrate yourself and really feel connected. So I think that's kind of where I felt the most of it. And I think, to go back to my comment about being white passing, just picking up on what some of Lou said, of people like not, there's a sense of folks not really expecting me to advocate the way I advocate in the workplace because of how I physically look. And there's an element of surprise there. So, there's been that I've sort of been able, like, it's allowed me to advocate in particular ways and kind of get some insights into how some of the folks in power are thinking about things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's, sometimes people mispronounce your name because they really just don't know, and one can gently correct them. But there are times when people deliberately do it, or do it in a mocking fashion, and they're just trying to belittle you. And I've certainly, seen that happening both in politics and in public, but also at conferences, big public events, where people will take the care to come and ask you, how do you pronounce your name? And then are careful to pronounce it the way you want it to be pronounced. And there are others who will mangle it repeatedly or shorten it, as you put it. And so those seem like little things, but those things can be belittling experiences to a lot of people. So I'm glad you raised that. Sochet, do you want to weigh in there? Because, I realize that a lot of our names are not common, or at least we're not perceived to be common. They're not your typical Anglo names. And sometimes one runs into all kinds of situations because of that.
Yeah, I think about the fact that I feel like my workplace has really come a long way. Just tracing back to where I was before, in a law firm that was primarily male dominated, where I was getting paid less than my male counterpart, who graduated the same year as I did, who that had a family while I was single and female and Asian. And I always got the sense that I was getting paid less without, because we don't talk about our salaries. We really should, but we don't. But I knew, I really got that sense, and I think I was right. Never mind that, on objective standards, I might have been more successful at marketing or networking. But I do feel very fortunate in that my job at Verizon, the second I got here, things turn around very quickly, because I went from a male-led, male-dominated law firm, all the stereotypes that you might have about said type, that kind of law firm I did see, right? It was like when I was at UConn Law interviewing on campus, there was a rumor going around that this particular law firm is like a boys club. And when I got there, it kind of was like a boys club. And there were some things that I had to say or do to shake things up a little bit. And of course, the male partners are like, whoa, let's call a meeting and talk about this, because this female summer associate is not comfortable or not happy that we're hosting an event at a members only club that only allowed males. So, working through and shaking things up a little bit at the law firm, I thought, wow, like, I didn't really do too much except complain about it, but they're taking it seriously. So this is great. I mean, I'm not that kind of person to be like actively, confronting people, but in any event, when I came to Verizon, I really felt like it just, it flipped it, and I went from that to a place where, you know, my boss was a woman, is a woman, still is, and then all of the people in the privacy office at that time were women. And it kind of felt like it was time to reboot. Like, how do I reinvent myself? And from the very beginning, I just advocated for myself, and I told my new boss, like, you gave me a range that HR was willing to pay me. I want the higher range. Like, why wouldn't I get the higher range? And so I told her that at the firm, I started behind, and there's no way that I was going to catch up. And I feel like that's an analogy for a lot of us in this world, as women of color. And so, you know, just not being afraid to advocate for myself, and pushing her, and she's, you know, of the same mind, and so she was able to advocate for me to get there. And so I felt like coming to Verizon, starting there from the beginning, gave me the opportunity not to fall behind. And so I think the work environment has a lot to do with what I see on a day-to-day basis and what the employers are communicating to employees as what's important, you know, at Verizon. And again, we didn't get to say this at the beginning, but I think all the panelists here speak on behalf of ourselves and not of our employer. But I will talk a lot about Verizon because I am proud of the company that we are. But, you know, on a daily basis, there are discussions about racial injustice and Black Lives Matter. And even today at 3 o'clock or 2 o'clock, actually, our CEO is doing a roundtable with the conferences, the U.S. conferences of mayors, including the mayor of Atlanta, and just talking about racial injustice. And so I feel like employers have a lot of work to do, but where you work does matter, because I feel like if I were at the law firm now, I might have so many things to talk about in terms of microaggressions. But here at Verizon, I feel like that's less of an issue for me because we've come such a long way, and I feel really fortunate for that.
That's really interesting, and I'm glad that you're talking about the role of private corporations and companies in creating an environment that is welcoming to everyone, and especially to women, particularly women of color. But the one thing that you said really struck me, and that is the sort of systematic inequality that women, and especially women of color, face in terms of remuneration. You know, I'm so glad to hear you say that you asked for the top end of your salary range, because women tend not to do that. We tend to be, you know, we sort of sat back while most men would, without any hesitation, you know, ask for whatever they think they're worth. And so it's really important to say this. And in academia too, there's a lot of inequality there. I know that Princeton, for instance, is just recently is giving $1.2 million to all its female professors because the feds found that it had systematically discriminated against female faculty. So, you know, it's everywhere. It can be in a private corporation, it can be in academia, it can be in government. And it is so important, I think, to address that in the law. If you know, we had the ERA, maybe at least we would have a standard, even a constitutional standard that would make equal pay, you know, besides the Lilly Ledbetter law, we would have it, you know, constitutionally mandated that there should be no discrimination. And there clearly is. We can see that. So I want to give Shante a chance also to sort of jump in here and tell us a little bit about, you know, just the original question about your own struggles and how that affected your early education and in your work in nonprofits, which of course tend to be usually better places also in terms of equity than other institutions. Go ahead, Shante.
I think in terms of just kind of advocating for myself as a Black woman, and I'm a Black woman of stature, I'm 6 feet tall, I played volleyball. It's been a kind of point of anxiety for me over like the last 15 years. And the reason why is because, you know, when I was younger, I really, I've always had strong viewpoints on things, and I always wanted to fight for what's right and fight for myself. But a lot of times as a Black woman, if you do advocate for yourself, it comes off as being disruptive, or it comes off as being angry or loud. And there's all these stereotypes around the angry Black woman. And so I think kind of early in my career, I just was kind of putting my head down, working hard. I wasn't speaking up for myself. I wasn't going out of my way to cause trouble because I was scared. There was almost a sense of, you are lucky to be here. So it's like, because I'm so lucky to be here, it's just like, sometimes your voice gets lost. And so I think over the last 5 years, I found out how important it was just to speak up for myself, not only for myself, but for people that would come after me. So I think that, there definitely needs to be more resources for women of color, just so we can understand, how to negotiate, how to, speak up without feeling like we're being a disruptor. And I feel like now, just with Black Lives Matter movement, being a disruptor is seen as a positive. People are actually listening. People are appreciating folks that are taking charge. And so even we kind of talked about the name thing at the top of the call. And so obviously my name is Shantae, and it's spelled super uniquely. My middle name is Nicole. And there would be times where I would just want to make a reservation to a restaurant, and I would try to use my Shantae to get it. And they would say, oh, we don't have any reservations left. Try next week. I would call back. A few minutes later, I would use my middle name to make the reservation, and magically there was openings. And so I started kind of using my middle name to make reservations, to use Uber, to just do stuff that most people, I think most white people don't even have to think about. They kind of just go about their day. And so I think probably 3 years ago, I was saying, I'm never gonna, I guess, demean myself by not using my family name, my God-given name, something that was given to me, something I'm proud of, just to kind of fit into a box and fit into a mold. Because I'm proud of being a Black woman. I wouldn't choose to be anything else. And so I feel like, it's just harder, especially as a Black woman who I look Black, I wear my hair in natural state, to really find that fine line of, pushing forward. So that's just kind of some of my experiences. I think I've been blessed because I have worked in the nonprofit sector for about 10 years. And so I've strategically picked organizations that had a lot of the same values as mine. I made sure I was in workplaces that was culturally diverse, that had diversity and inclusion efforts. And so I've been lucky in that sense in the workplace. I think more of the kind of times where I've had issues is either in academia or just day-to-day life is where I've seen kind of that divide. And I think because I went to two predominantly white institutions, of course, UConn, and I went to Georgetown as well, is where I kind of did find some more challenges.
Yeah, I can well imagine, having studied this, as part of my work, the kinds of racial and gendered stereotypes that, African American women in particular have been subjected to historically, right, is something that I think there really needs to be pushed back. Just your stories right now of talking about how people discriminated against you simply because of how they perceived you through your name is just mind-boggling, right? That you wouldn't be able to do those simple tasks. I mean, I remember being a graduate student in New York City and many of my Black friends asking white friends to hail cabs for them because they're like, they're not going to stop if we hail them, but you guys go ahead and, they will stop if you do that. So these kind of everyday ways in which racism works itself out is amazing. And then, of course, the stereotypes, particularly that Black women have to face. It reminds me actually of this abolitionist feminist who's one of my favorites. I'm writing about her in my new book. I also wrote about her in my book on abolition. Her name was Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, and she attended the National Women's Rights Convention in 1866, immediately after the Civil War. And in her speech, she famously said, "You white women speak of rights, I speak of wrongs." And if you think of your story, I mean, how relevant is that even today. So, I think we all know, and sometimes people around us don't know how bad things are until something dramatic happens, like the murder of George Floyd. And I think what's happened with the movement for Black Lives this year is that, we've gained so many allies. People have just woken up who've been blind to kind of systemic inequality and racism, have had it thrown at their faces, and they're finally kind of waking up to this. So these are the kinds of things, I think, conversations it's so important for us to have. But I wanted you all to also tell me a little bit about if you felt there was somebody in your life, in either in your education or in your career, in your work, who supported you, who may have mentored you. We know the challenges are huge, but sometimes there are all these silver linings, where somebody has come and just acted in a way that has not been hurtful or helpful, but in fact has been empowering. So I think it's important to share those stories too. And I was wondering if you would like to do that. Who would like to go first?
So I'll just say that, I am a big cheerleader of Verizon because I really feel like through all of this, we've done it right. We've handled the pandemic right. We've handled the discussions following George Floyd's murder right. And I feel like, the work environment I have is a really good example of having a supportive work environment, because there's a lot of messaging, and we even have like a learning portal of all of the various important discussions and YouTube videos and things from experts addressing racial inequality, social injustice. And I feel like I don't need to cover anymore because the company has given us enough enough. They've empowered us to say, the idea of covering who you are. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with the concept of covering, but I think we're all familiar with it because we all do this, which is that, I don't want to be my true authentic self at work because there is some sort of stigma associated with that. So for example, I'm a mom to 2 young boys. I don't want people to know that I'm a mom. And so I won't talk about the fact that I'm gonna, jump off at 4 o'clock and take my kid to karate. And, the company has really given us a lot of empowerment to say, no, that's not what we want you to do. We want you to be who you are, and there shouldn't be repercussions. And so, especially in this day and age, right now in the pandemic where we're working at home, and we can't hide that. Like, I can't hide the fact that sometimes my kids walk into the office, and it's been really tough for a lot of us, including those of us with children. And so, even if we were really good at covering before, we can't cover now, given that we've invited work. And I feel like the person who really did a lot of this for us is our general counsel, Craig Silliman, who actually, I know him because he hired me and I feel close to him. But one of the things that he did earlier on when we had to pivot and work from home was he wrote a blog post called Of Children, Dogs, and Vacuum Cleaners. And if anybody wants to see this, I'm happy to share it with you. It was on LinkedIn, and the one paragraph that he wrote really, really helped. And I hope that other employers feel the same way, which is that, this is what he wrote. He said, "For me, the sound of a child or the bark of a dog, even the disarray in the background, is a joy. It is a piece of your life, of your humanity, brought into frame, and I feel privileged to share it. At any given time, we were all juggling many things in our lives, working, raising children, caring for loved ones who are sick, running errands, and so much more. During this unique time, we have asked many of you to take your work into your home. Do not feel that you have to keep your home out of that workspace." So that was really powerful and really empowering. And I feel like, companies that do this and leaders that are conscientious like this make people feel supported, even if it's coming from a very high level. And of course it trickles down to, to the rest of us. So kudos to employers who have that kind of humanity. I think, Manisha, you're on mute.
Absolutely. I muted myself so that you have the floor. So Chetan, of course, began talking without unmuting myself. Another one of those wonderful things that happens on Zoom. I'm sure Verizon is going to be really happy getting this full-throated endorsement from you. But, I think many, private companies, for them, it's important to create that kind of workplace environment, a friendly one, especially for women, I think, who have borne the brunt of it, and women of color. Let's not forget that the pandemic has been particularly bad for people of color in this country. And, we all are relatively privileged for the places that we work in our companies, whether for reasons of genuine reasons, but also for their corporate well health. I think they need to be mindful of these things. But there's so many people who don't have those supports. And I keep thinking of all those essential workers, people who don't have that kind of support that we can work from home, for instance. What about all those frontline workers and those they're called essential workers, but we essentially don't pay them, so it's so important, I think, for women of color in particular to think about these things in the broadest sense possible, in terms of what my abolitionists always called human rights, and things that Judge Baker Motley was very well aware of and fought for. So some more experiences about getting support either at your workplace or having a particular mentor you might remember fondly, for sort of having your back.
I can go quickly.
Go ahead, Bruce.
So I was thinking about this question because for a long time, I think as women of color, we're told to find women of color to be our mentors. And for years, I'm the Black sheep of the Latinx community, because I challenge the ways that non-Black folks engage with whiteness, but particularly anti-Blackness. So that always made me radical in spaces that were supposed to be about our struggle and community, and this notion of like Blackness and Latinidad being mutually exclusive when we have Black folks across the diaspora. And so it isn't until now that I think I have Latinx mentors that I trust, right, to be authentic and to challenge white supremacy and anti-Blackness. So I say that to say, that's my long way of saying that I'm not all skin folk are kinfolk, but also be mindful of who your mentors are. And sometimes we get taught that you have to pick a mentor that's like at the top. And honestly, my mentors are women of color, femme folks, queer folks around me who are not in those high positions to make those decisions, because you need that group of people, that family, to kind of ground you and remind you that you're more than the production that you can contribute to any company or institution. And so I've had mentors, and most of those have been Black women or Black folks, intentionally. And so I have been very intentional that I am careful about who I align myself with in terms of my politics, and in terms of what I want to contribute and deconstruct. And so I think it's important when thinking about that, how do you, because some of us are going to be in companies that are not great, in institutions that are not great. And guess what? Education is not that different. So I say that to say it's about finding your people, finding folks who are ready to do the good fight, and knowing that the fight is long term and that you have to be committed. And also ask yourself, if things are good for you, that does not mean that they're good for your Black coworkers, your queer coworkers, your trans coworkers. And if you're really about this work, then you have to risk, right? And so understanding your own positionality of privilege within your company or institution is also very important, because you can be someone's mentor when they don't see you as a mentor because of whatever reasons. You have to be vocal. And so I think that goes back to what Shantae was saying, like as a Black woman, she has a particular experience. And as a Puerto Rican woman who's not read as Black, I get to challenge and say like, oh, I'm gonna make sure that more Black folks get into this conversation. I don't have to speak for Black folks, but can I make a move to ensure that someone is at the table? And so that's all connected to who you align yourself with and who your mentors are, and who do you see as value beyond what you can get from them in production.
Absolutely, and I think sometimes it's also a question of taking the initiative and finding your mentors and finding people who will support you. Just as you said, Lou, surrounding yourself with people who you find supportive, right? Besides speaking up for others too. I found that when I first came to this country to graduate school, I was in a history department and I demanded to TA for Afro-American Studies course. And that was the best thing I did because that professor told me, well, look, you want to study this, you should be in such and such place and you should get your PhD there. And so this, well-respected African Americanist, he's the one who guided me then to my doctoral program. But in a way, I sought him out and he responded. And I think that's so important to do. Sometimes, especially young students I meet, they don't realize that you can also choose your mentors. You can create supportive environments and remove yourself from environments that are not helpful and that are not, that are not supporting you simply. Does anyone want to jump in here? Go ahead, Meghna. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great discussion and I really appreciate hearing everyone's really personal stories. I was just going to say that, I've struggled. There are obviously lots of different kinds of mentors that we all can have. And I've been very fortunate to have mentors who taught me the substance of the law. I've struggled to, I think, be really seen by to me, like an ideal mentor is one that really sees us. And that's, I think, what a lot of these stories have spoken to. And where I've found those relationships and where it's been most meaningful is one where they've seen my humanity. So, the law can obviously be very demanding and challenging. And there's this ethos around it of how you need to be and, what you can show and what you can't show. And the mentors that have been the most valuable to me, and they mostly have been other women or women of color, have been those that kind of are able to transcend that ethos to really see, really allow for just being and, understanding where we come from and how that figures into how we kind of show up here. And then secondly, I think there's been a set of mentors that I've had throughout the years, and maybe not a single one, but that have really spoken to, been able to help me overcome my self-doubt. So saying things like, why are you making that decision that you won't get the job? Like, you should apply, I'll help you. Or, so I think those have been those have showed up as really important elements for me. Those who can see me as a whole person, including my cultural background and not just as some sort of two-dimensional representative of it. And those who have been able to help me kind of overcome self-doubt, because I think that's kind of a characteristic, if you will, or a sense of feeling that can, I think, often is, for women of color comes up when we're seeking to advance our careers or seek out new opportunities or expand our horizons.
Yeah, this is Amy. I agree with what's been said. Actually, Shantae, your story reminded me of some of the false starts that I had when I first started out as an attorney. I was offered the opportunity to match up with a more senior woman attorney as a mentor. And so I took it. We had an initial call. And one of the first things she said to me was that you should drop Lynn because Amy Lynn sounds too cutesy. And I had to let her know that Lynn is my maiden name and I was going to keep it because I wanted it as part of my name. And so I've continued to use it professionally. But all my mentors early on were white men because that was predominantly what was in the profession at the time when I started. And I was fortunate to be able to work with some excellent attorneys who knew how to practice law well and with integrity and who always encouraged me not to sell myself short. And I took that to heart and I really started to become more involved with mentors of the Asian Pacific American community when I started to join the Affinity Bar Associations after 5 years out from practicing. So I found a lot of support through the Affinity Bar Associations as well.
That's so important that you said that, Amy, because sometimes we feel, we get caught up in our identities and we think that this is the only safe space. But, I found as a Civil War historian, trained as a Civil War historian, I was surrounded by white men all the time doing political history. They're the only people who are doing that. In fact, I had somebody even tell me, how come you're not doing the social history of slavery? Because that's where most people of color go. That's where most African Americans go. How come you're doing the politics? But it was these men who actually told me I'm perfectly capable of writing political history too. And that's important to remember. Shantae, go ahead.
No, I agree with what everyone's saying. And I also wanted to kind of, discuss having people that may not be your mentors, but they're championing you kind of on the sidelines, or people that are bringing you up in discussions in different rooms. I know for most of my jobs, that's how I got my jobs, or because there was somebody that I had some sort of relationship with, either a former colleague or a former supervisor or someone I went to school with, that they brought me up in conversations. And so that was really helpful just in navigating kind of my career thus far. And so I think it's important not only to have people that are directly mentoring you and seeking out those mentors, but making sure you have other relationships with people that are just rooting for you on the sidelines as well.
That is so important, because I remember there was a tradition actually within Black communities of race men and race women who would, the motto of the National Association for Colored Women was lifting as we climb, right? And it was always to be generous and to bring people along with you and not be totally caught up in your own personal success. And in history, we've had to form groups because we found that women historians are consistently cited less than men. We don't know whether it's just intentional or whether it's just the way people react to names or to authority, names associated with authority, genders associated with authority. So they founded a group called Women Also Know History. And what would you know, that made a huge difference with women historians being called on, being cited much more, because they actually organized around it. But you're right. I mean, having people who could just, lend that extra word for you is so important. There's another question that has come up, and we are running out of time, and I want to make sure that we address that. And that is, what advice would you give? Because we know we have a lot of students and others who are listening into this event because they're interested in these issues too. And whether you all had some advice to give younger people who might be facing, particularly challenging environments, right? So, Sochet, I can see that you feel very validated, you feel happy in your workplace. But let's say the instance was where you are in a place that is demeaning and belittling to you all the time, and real challenges of not being seen and heard. What would be the kinds of advice that you would give those kind of people?
So I think about, and I don't mean to portray that I don't have struggles, but because I think I do sometimes. But I think it's not to be afraid to speak up and to advocate for yourself. I don't think things really happen on its own, right? You're not going to get a new job with the salary you want without some sort of advocacy, and you really have to stand up and fight for it. And sometimes it's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to require you to be vulnerable and to be, scared. And the person that I look to for some words of wisdom on this is Brene Brown. And I don't know if you guys on this panel or in the audience know Brene Brown, but she's a researcher. I see Meghna, you're shaking your head, and Shantae. She's a researcher. She researches shame and vulnerability, and she has a lot of wonderful, helpful guidance on how to lead, and not just lead an organization, but really yourself. And her whole premise is really just to do that dirty work and to get in that arena and fight. And it's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be scary. You're going to get knocked on your ass, but you can't make progress without having that fight. And so I think, don't be afraid to get uncomfortable. Don't run away from that. And so, for example, if I get an opportunity to speak in front of a group with senior people, I might be like, oh my gosh, that's really scary, and think like, no, I don't want to do that. But then pushing myself and saying, okay, it's going to be scary. I'm going to be nervous, but it's a really great opportunity. Let's do this. So it's really like, stay brave, stay awkward. And I think that's really the whole message that Brene Brown delivers. And so if anybody's interested in her, you can Google her. And she has a lot of TED Talks, and she also has a Netflix special on this. So that would be my piece of advice. Don't be afraid to advocate for yourself.
Great. Anyone else want to jump in? Shantae, go ahead.
I love to jump in, and I think that's it's an awesome way to put it. I know that a lot of us have struggled with imposter syndrome. I'm speaking as a first-gen African-American woman. It's something that, like Chuck said, I had this opportunity today to be on this panel, and I'm looking at everyone's bios. I'm like, oh my God, all these people are doctors and lawyers and all these things, and I'm feeling like kind of like the odd man out. And I had to really push myself and be like, you know what? Like, I'm just as qualified. I have a great experience. I have a great story, just like everyone else in this panel. So it's, pushing yourself to really think outside the box, to get uncomfortable, and just to get your hands dirty and to speak up for yourself. I think that's so important. I have a lot of young people that I mentor, just because I'm a volleyball coach and I do some other things that, I'm always pushing them to, really advocate for themselves. And then I have to remind myself, okay, as the adult in this situation, I have to do the same thing for myself as well. So definitely love Brene Brown. Great, great podcast she has too. So people should definitely check that out.
That's so important. If you don't advocate for yourself, no one else will, right? And I love that you said that, because you really need to believe in yourself too. And in fact, your personal experiences, I think, were some of the most moving that we heard here. And just even just your presence, you said, as a volleyball player, somebody you had to kind of make sure that you didn't appear a certain way to others. I have to tell you, though, that I taught at UMass for 20 years. And when I took this job at UConn, I just loved, one of the reasons I loved coming here was they had this like slogan, UConn, where the men are men and the women are champions, because of our basketball team. And I thought that was so cool. As a woman, I don't really play basketball, to tell you the truth, but it just spoke to me. I said, oh, wow, I like that. I think I could be in a place like that. But it is important to champion yourselves, and to not feel as if your experience is any less. In fact, it may be the most valuable in the end, right? Luz, you were saying that you felt the same way as Shantae, so I want you to jump in here and tell me what you're thinking.
Yeah, I was actually talking to someone, was like, everyone's from law school. I'm like, I'm just a little grad student right now. But like sitting down and writing like my bio, which I'm always cringe at, and I'm like, oh, I guess I've done some things. So I think it's just like important to also not make yourself small, especially in I say, regardless of what career you're in, social media has really taken up the social networking and how you I'm trying to find the word, do your brand is very different now. And so I've been very conscious where I'm like, I'm doing great work and I see other folks get celebrated. And I'm like, I've been doing that for like 5 years, 10 years, but other people are being celebrated because they just discovered it. So I think in this time of Black Lives Matter and folks trying to be racially, intersectionally woke, we have to really sit down and honor the people who have been doing the work, and that includes ourselves. And so how do we continue uplifting that, but also welcoming new folks into that fold? And so I really think a lot about that, and how, like, as much as an optimist I want to be, the time will come where people will be like, oh, we already did that work, it's done. But for us who've been doing this for a long time, we know it's not done. And so those things are important to be consistent. So for me, being a part of these panels is like, is my brand consistent in terms of what I deliver is what's important. And it is another way that I think, because I actually don't know how I got connected to this panel, but they asked and I was like, sure. So somewhere along the line, someone was in a room saying, hey, you should look at Luz. So I think like that is the same thing for all of us in this room through this connection.
Absolutely. And as a nerd historian, I can assure you all that, we talk about intersectionality and we talk about Black women's activism and, all this has been happening for generations. You know, when I started writing my book, I'm discovering Black women in the 18th century, in the colonial era, suing for their freedom. Well, that's pretty great. And so, I think it's important to remember that we've had a lot of people come before us, and that we are like standing on their shoulders. I speak as an immigrant, as an Indian American. I know I couldn't come into this country, even immigrate to this country, without the civil rights movement, right? If there was not a new immigration law, none of us would have been able to even come in. You think historically, even of something like, Chinese exclusion laws that was there in the United States for a long time. So, I think it's important to draw these kind of intersections sometimes. So again, we have only 4 or 5 minutes, and Meghna and Amy, if you want to jump in and talk a little bit about advice too, but maybe let's talk about some of the intersections here. We are Asian Americans, we are immigrants, we are Black Americans, we are Latina American. There are just so many different groups that we represent, but I think we share so much more than what divides us in a way. And I think it's important perhaps to talk about that too a little bit. So go ahead, whoever wants to jump in here. Meghna, I see you're unmuted, so go ahead, and then Amy, go ahead.
Yeah, well, on the advice front, I think it's great, Manisha, that you brought up intersectionality, and it's so important it's evident from the discussion today how much we all share. On the advice front, I think one of the things that's really, it just sounds really, really basic, but has helped me a lot along the way is just really remembering that, like you can take up space in a room, and we tend to shrink, and we tend to, and it sounds really strange a little bit, but that mind-body connection is so strong. And to like walk into a room and remember you're allowed to be there and you're allowed to take up space has, for me, particularly over the years, mostly being in a profession, especially in private law firms where sometimes I'm the only woman or the only woman of color, one of few women. And just those words can really help you kind of, be a certain way and show up in a certain way. And I think on a practical level, I've always tried to, and this doesn't always work, and it's not kind of a linear process, but I've always tried to seek out mentors outside of my organization, because I think it's important to be able to, when you're looking to kind of advance through an organization and expand your career horizons, it just the way that the system works here for like with a workplace and in a particular organization, it's very helpful to have some outside input. And there's all types of affinity groups. I know as a lawyer, I'm part of the Corporate Council of Women of Color sort of consortium and the Lawyers Collaborative for Legal Diversity. And I found, those organizations really, really helpful in creating those relationships that then allow me to basically kind of have a brain trust when I have some questions about how to advance my career. So those are just a couple of things that I would add to the discussion.
Yeah, I would agree with Meghna. And now that we're in this virtual world, there's so many community webinars. As I mentioned, the CBA has free webinars, and also through the educational system, the UN is actually having a series of gender equity webinars. You can connect on to them by Zoom live and interact with people all over the country or all over the state, and just take the opportunity to jump in with both feet and be part of the discussion and ask your questions. Don't feel like you have to sit isolated in your room in front of your computer without any personal interaction.
That's great advice, because especially as you said, in this world where we are in fact interacting virtually with everyone, and in all ways, there are so many excellent free webinars and series that one can log on to. I would recommend. I was last year a fellow at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study in Cambridge, and they just do so many webinars on different issues. And in fact, we are doing one on the legacies, the afterlives of slavery and race in the North on Thursday. So they do a lot on gender, on especially looking at the long 19th Amendment and looking at some of the forgotten stories, especially by women of color in those in those histories. So Yeah, that's a really good good advice, you know, to do this. And so I have to particularly, you know, thank everyone who is here today, joining us, and who listened to in with us for this conversation. I know that our time is up, and so I have to say that you know, I regret not spending more time listening to you guys, because it's inspiring to hear people talk about their personal experiences and some of the things that they have achieved. And I hope that our audience today felt the same. I will end by saying that there are actually this group, Women in Philanthropy at UConn, is a really important group that is giving a collective voice to all our students, to our alum, and to, you know, faculty, staff, everyone here. And I think it's an important group that you know, inspires us collectively to share our stories, and also to transform perhaps our students' lives by having them log in and listen to us. So thank you all so much for sharing this hour with me. I see a question here in the chat from one of our audience members about whether this is being recorded, and I can see actually in my screen it says recording. So I am thinking that this is being recorded and will be put up by Women in Philanthropy at UConn Foundation as a link. So you get, the panelists will have that too. And somebody asked for the link to the Cambridge Gender webinar. Well, that's, you can just go to the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study, their webpage, and you will get all the entire series of talks and lectures, and even links, you know, YouTube links of previous webinars and lectures. So thank you all for being here. And it was a real pleasure to talk to all of you. And it's nice to have this space that UConn has provided us to have this conversation today. So thanks so much.
Great.
Bye.
Thank you.